You're listening to a podcast by Way Collective, a contemplative community for love and liberation in Santa Barbara, California. This recording was the conversation starter at our dinner and dialogue gathering on October 15th, 2025. Thanks for tuning in.
Hey everybody, it's great to be with you again. Tonight, I'm really excited to be talking about ancient teachings and how these wisdom traditions and modern discoveries seem to be meeting up in really beautiful ways. And they're even showing us that consciousness, connection, and compassion aren't just ideas, but are living forces that shape how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to each other, and how we relate to the world around us. So as we get started tonight, I wanted to ask you a question. And that question is, have you ever had that strange feeling, maybe the hairs on the back of your neck go up, and you just are sensing something, and you're sensing that someone is staring at you. And when you turned around, you realized that you were right. Someone was staring at you. And if you haven't had this experience, no worries. It's just describing an awareness. And we all know what it feels like to be aware, even if we can't quite explain how awareness happens. So this awareness that I'm talking about is really a consciousness that I want to talk about tonight. And awareness or consciousness, it's a quiet presence beneath our thoughts, beneath our sensations. It's really the felt sense of being aware, not just being awake and thinking, but it's the experience of being. And an interesting side note about this is that the word consciousness originally implied a mutual awareness. And really that's a reminder to us that even in its earliest use, consciousness carried this idea of connection. And it's this idea of connection that Rupert Sheldrake was so interested in, and he's done a lot of research about it. And Rupert Sheldrake's a Cambridge-educated biologist living in England, and he has spent decades studying this phenomenon of feeling like you're being stared at. And in fact, in thousands of controlled experiments, people were able to sense when they were being watched, even when no sensory clues were available to them. And so this raises the question, could our consciousness, our awareness, be something that extends beyond the physical boundaries of our bodies, moving through us maybe and connecting us? And Sheldrake thinks, yes, absolutely, this is possible. And he suggests that our perception involves fields that stretch out beyond our bodies, which allow us to sense when we're being watched or even when we're being thought about. And perhaps these ideas sort of sound out there. And really, whether we want to accept his conclusions or not, the question itself invites us to wonder if maybe consciousness is something not produced by our brains, but maybe consciousness is a field that we can attune to, and one that all of existence participates in. And this is what many wisdom traditions have been teaching for thousands of years, that everything is deeply connected, that we're all deeply connected through this shared field of awareness, this field of consciousness. From the Hindu understanding of the one divine reality present in all things, and also Buddhist teachings on the interdependence and compassion to the Christian mystics who experienced God within all creation. These each point us towards the understanding of this interconnection, and each offering us that consciousness or awareness itself may be something shared rather than separate. And when we recognize the wisdom of this reality, our shared and connected lives, then compassion naturally arises. And it's a reminder that caring for ourselves and caring for one another is also caring for the whole. And what contemplative traditions have long understood, science and philosophy are now beginning to explore in new ways. And so while the question continues to be argued, is consciousness a product of biology, or is it a fundamental feature of the universe? It does open the door to a perspective that new perspective, and it's not too new actually. Tim talked about it last week, the philosophy, and it's called panpsychism, and it's been around since the early 20th century. But it's the view that consciousness is not something confined to the human brain, but it might be fundamental, a fundamental aspect of the universe itself. And perhaps it's actually present in varying degrees, of course, throughout the natural world, from the subtle intelligence of cells to the cooperative networks of trees and plants, and even far beyond into the stars and galaxies. And this idea of consciousness being present to some degree in all things, well, this echoes Eastern contemplative thought and also what the Christian mystics taught. In Buddhism, they taught us that awareness is not limited to the individual mind, but that all of life arises within a field of interconnection. And also, a key teaching in Buddhism is the principle of interdependence. It's the recognition that nothing exists in isolation. Every being, every event arises in relationship with everything else. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, had a beautiful way to teach this concept. He would take a simple sheet of paper and he would explain that this one piece of paper actually contains the whole universe within it. The cloud, the rain, the sunshine, the tree, the logger, and even the bread that sustained the logger. Also, our own awareness as we see it. Nothing exists by itself. Everything depends on everything else. To be is to interbe, as Thich Nhat Hanh called it. He even coined a word, interbeing, for this whole concept. And St. Francis of Assisi, he experienced all of creation, animals, plants, even the elements, as brothers and sisters, revealing a profound sense of kinship with all of life. For St. Francis, compassion was not sentiment, it was relationship. It was a lived awareness of God's presence in every being and every moment. Also, Thomas Merton, he's a modern mystic. He echoed that this vision of unity by writing that we are already one, but we imagine that we are not. I want to repeat that. It's so beautiful. We are already one, but we imagine that we are not. Thomas Merton understood that consciousness, he understood it as a whole hidden universe. He said he understood it as a field in which all beings are held together. He bridged Christian mysticism and Eastern contemplative traditions, teaching that when we awaken to this shared awareness, compassion naturally arises as its expression. In fact, he and Thich Nhat Hanh were dear friends in the 1960s. So that's just an aside. But anyway, these wisdom traditions remind us that interconnection, that our common humanity is not an abstract idea. We can actually feel it. We know the flutter of emotion in our chest and heart. We've felt the warmth of connection and kindness. We can feel the way empathy softens us and melts the boundaries between self and other, between me and you. And now, due to decades of research, including research done at the Mind and Life Institute, which the Dalai Lama founded many, many years ago, or helped to found, there's been research that can measure what was once only intuited by these traditions. And that is the way that our hearts and brains and nervous systems physically actually come into alignment when experiencing compassion and when experiencing shared presence. We really, literally are hardwired for kindness. We're hardwired for compassion. And we get a good dose of those feel-good chemicals, serotonin, oxytocin, and dopamine, when we're kind or compassionate. And we even get that same chemical surge just by observing acts of kindness, which make us want to be more kind. It's kind of, compassion is actually contagious. And it's the body's reward system. It feels good to be kind, it feels good to be compassionate, and our bodies encourage us to do it again. So research now can show that the heart's electromagnetic field really extends several feet beyond the body. It can be measured several feet beyond the body, and it can synchronize with other hearts nearby. So when we sit in calm presence together, our hearts and our brains literally come into attunement, finding this rhythm of connection, and especially in moments of shared stillness. In fact, here at Way Collective, when we have our monthly mindfulness, we've had several people comment on the felt sense of the difference between meditating together and maybe meditating at home. When we're all together in a group, we feel more connected and we feel less alone. Again, it harkens back to that interconnectedness, that sense of being one. And we've also learned through scientific research that these interconnections, these acts of caring, if you will, are more common than we had originally realized in the animal and plant and trees in the world of nature. In fact, elephants have been observed consoling one another with their trunks by touching their trunks. And they also mourn their dead. And rats, yes, rats show caring. They will actually forego food to free another rat. So they help each other. To free another trapped rat. So they help each other. And crows and ravens, they show cooperative intelligence as they work together to solve problems. They'll warn each other of dangers, and they actually share information across flocks. And I thought that was so cool. Let's see, trees. Trees will communicate through the mycelia network and send nutrients and warning signals and even chemical support to their neighbor trees nearby. And also, older mother trees have been shown to nourish young seedlings. So cooperation and care seem to be really woven into the very fabric of life itself. So compassion in this sense isn't something unique to humans. It's how life sustains and supports life. And having this wisdom really then calls us to live with intention. And in the Book of Joy by the Archbishop Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama, they talk a lot about compassion. And they talk a lot about it, especially as one of the key components for the intention of living with joy. Having compassion for oneself, for friends and for family, for those you don't know, and even for those you don't agree with, is really important for the benefit of all. And the Dalai Lama points out a really important distinction. He says we shouldn't confuse compassion with empathy. Empathy is definitely important, but he says that empathy is experiencing another's emotion, and sometimes that can be overwhelming. He says compassion is a more empowered state where we want what is best for the other person. And the Dalai Lama says that when we see a person who's getting crushed by a rock, the goal is not to get under the rock with them and feel what they're feeling, but it's to help remove the rock. That's the compassionate act, the compassionate thing to do. And so tonight, as we move into our table dialogues and our conversations with each other, I'd like to leave you with the thoughts of a great scientist, Albert Einstein. And these are his ideas on consciousness, connection, and compassion. Back to, 1954 he wrote this. And he says, "A human being is part of a whole, called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. We experience ourselves, our thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of our consciousness. And this delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circles of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty." And so tonight, the three questions that we have: the self, the spiritual, and the society. And I'm really looking forward to the dialogues tonight. So let's start off here with the self question. Have you ever experienced a moment when awareness felt larger than yourself, like sensing someone's gaze or feeling a deep connection beyond the boundary of your own body? And how does your perspective shift when you get curious about the idea that all living beings might experience some form of consciousness? And the spiritual question: when or where do you most feel a sense of connection, or what Thich Nhat Hanh called interbeing? And what does this reveal to you about how we interact with all living beings? Does it shift the way you might practice prayer, meditation, or compassion? And finally, the society question: if we are truly more interconnected than we realize, how might curiosity and compassion change the way we live together? What practices might we intentionally cultivate or make ongoing when building community together? So that's it. Let's go enjoy the table conversations. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for listening to this podcast by Way Collective. To keep up with our community, you can subscribe to this podcast, go to www.waycollective.org, or follow us on Instagram at @waycollective. Peace and every good, y'all.